Perched high above the Hudson River, where mist drifts across the water and iron towers rise from rolling lawns, stands a mansion that feels more like a legend than a residence. Lyndhurst is not simply a house, it is a Gothic dream carved into the American landscape. Built in the 19th century at a time when New York's elite were redefining power, wealth, and beauty, Lyndhurst defied every architectural rule of its era. With soaring towers, pointed arches, stained glass windows, and shadowed corridors, it looked nothing like the stately symmetry Americans were used to. Some called it visionary, others called it madness. Over the decades, this estate became home to politicians, tycoons, and one of the most controversial railroad barons in U.S. history. Within these walls, fortunes were made, secrets were kept, and America's industrial age quietly unfolded. Every room, every window, every carefully framed view of the Hudson was designed to impress and to endure. Today, Lyndhurst remains astonishingly intact, a rare time capsule where architecture, landscape, and history still speak with the same voice they had over 150 years ago. From its towering observation deck to its hidden service corridors, this mansion tells a story far deeper than beauty alone. In this video, we'll uncover the most fascinating facts, hidden details, and remarkable stories behind Lyndhurst Mansion, and discover why this Gothic masterpiece continues to captivate visitors from around the world. Lyndhurst Mansion stands today as one of the most complete and dramatic expressions of Gothic Revival architecture ever built in the United States. At a time when American wealth favored balance, symmetry, and classical restraint, Lyndhurst dared to be something entirely different: emotional, romantic, irregular, and unapologetically medieval in spirit. Its very silhouette rejects order, rising instead in a cascade of towers, gables, chimneys, and pointed arches that feel alive against the Hudson River sky. Designed in 1838 by architect Alexander Jackson Davis, Lyndhurst was conceived not as a conventional country house, but as an architectural experience. Davis believed architecture should stir emotion, and Gothic Revival was the perfect language for that ambition. Unlike Greek Revival mansions that communicated rationality and power, Gothic Revival evoked mystery, imagination, and history. Lyndhurst was meant to feel old, storied, and almost legendary, even when it was brand new. One of the defining characteristics of Lyndhurst's Gothic design is its intentional asymmetry. No facade is perfectly balanced. Towers rise where they are visually dramatic, not where symmetry demands. Windows vary in size and shape. Rooflines climb and fall unpredictably. This irregularity was radical for its time and deeply unsettling to critics who expected architectural order. Yet that very unpredictability is what gives Lyndhurst its haunting beauty and sense of movement. The mansion's pointed arches, inspired by medieval European cathedrals and castles, appear throughout the structure, framing windows, doors, and interior passages. These arches draw the eye upward, reinforcing the verticality that defines Gothic architecture. The effect is subtle but powerful. Visitors feel smaller, more contemplative, and aware that the building dominates the space rather than simply occupying it. Equally striking is Lyndhurst's ornamental detailing. Carved stone, decorative tracery, finials, and patterned brickwork give the mansion texture and shadow. Gothic Revival thrives on contrast, light and dark, solid and delicate, and Lyndhurst uses these elements masterfully. As sunlight shifts throughout the day, the mansion's surfaces transform, creating an ever-changing visual drama that feels almost theatrical. When the house was expanded in the 1860s, Davis was brought back to enlarge his original vision rather than replace it. This decision was crucial. Instead of disrupting the architectural language, the additions intensified it. The most iconic feature, the four-story observation tower, reinforced Lyndhurst's castle-like presence and cemented its identity as a romantic fortress overlooking the Hudson. From afar, the mansion now looked less like a residence and more like a relic from another continent and another century. Inside, the Gothic Revival theme continues with vaulted ceilings, carved woodwork, stained glass windows, and dramatic fireplaces. These interiors were not merely decorative, they were immersive, Lyndhurst was designed to feel like a complete world, a place where architecture shaped emotion, mood, and even behavior. Walking through its halls was meant to feel like stepping into a story rather than a floor plan. What makes Lyndhurst especially rare is how authentically intact this Gothic vision remains. Many 19th century Gothic Revival homes were later corrected or modernized, stripped of their theatrical excess. Lyndhurst survived largely untouched, preserving an architectural philosophy that was bold, controversial, and visionary. Today, it stands not just as a mansion, but as a manifesto in stone, proof that American architecture once dared to be poetic, mysterious, and emotionally charged. Lyndhurst is not Gothic Revival inspired. It is Gothic Revival realized. A mansion that does not merely reflect history, but actively performs it. To understand Lyndhurst Mansion, you must first understand the mind that imagined it. Alexander Jackson Davis was not just an architect. He was a visionary who believed buildings should inspire emotion, shape identity, and tell stories. In the early 19th century, when American architecture largely copied classical European forms, Davis stood apart. He wanted architecture to feel something. Lyndhurst became his most daring and enduring statement. Born in 1803, Davis rose to prominence during a moment when the United States was searching for its architectural voice. The young nation was torn between classical ideals that symbolized democracy and newer romantic movements that embraced imagination, history, and nature. Davis aligned himself firmly with the Romantic camp. He believed the future of American architecture lay not in rigid symmetry, but in expressive forms that harmonized with the landscape. When Davis was commissioned in 1838 to design a country house for former New York City Mayor William Paulding, Jr., he seized the opportunity to push boundaries. What he created, originally called Knoll, shocked the architectural establishment. Rather than a neat, balanced villa, Davis produced an asymmetrical Gothic residence filled with towers, pointed windows, and dramatic roof lines. It looked less like a home and more like a medieval manor transplanted to the Hudson Valley. Critics were merciless. The house was quickly labeled Paulding's Folly, a nickname that implied architectural excess and poor judgment. But Davis was unmoved. He understood that innovation often provokes discomfort. In his view, Lyndhurst was not folly, it was evolution. He was crafting a new American aesthetic that rejected imitation and embraced emotional power. Davis's brilliance lay in how he integrated architecture with environment. Lyndhurst was carefully positioned to interact with the Hudson River, surrounding hills and changing light. Windows were placed not for uniformity, but for views. Towers were raised not for symmetry, but for drama. Every irregularity served a visual or emotional purpose. The mansion was meant to be experienced from multiple angles, revealing different personalities as one moved through the landscape. Perhaps most remarkable is that Davis returned decades later to expand his own creation. In the 1860s, merchant George Merritt purchased the estate and asked Davis to enlarge it significantly. Rather than overpowering the original structure, Davis deepened it. He added new wings, extended rooms, and most famously, designed the towering belvedere that defines Lyndhurst's skyline today. Few architects in history are given the chance to evolve a single building across generations, and fewer still succeed without compromising the original vision. Inside Lyndhurst, Davis's hand is everywhere. From custom furniture designs to interior woodwork, fireplaces, and decorative motifs, the mansion reflects a holistic approach to architecture. Davis did not design shells, he designed environments. Each room contributes to a larger emotional narrative, moving from intimate and shadowed spaces to soaring, light-filled chambers. Beyond Lyndhurst, Davis influenced American architecture through his publications, pattern books, and advocacy for Gothic revival and picturesque design. Yet no other work captures his philosophy as completely. Lyndhurst stands as his architectural autobiography. Bold, romantic, controversial, and uncompromising. Today, as visitors walk through its halls or gaze up at its towers, they are not just seeing a mansion. They are witnessing the legacy of a man who believed American architecture could be imaginative, expressive, and deeply human. Alexander Jackson Davis did not just design Lyndhurst. He challenged America to dream in stone. When Lyndhurst was first completed in 1838, it did not inspire admiration. It provoked outrage. The mansion, then known simply as Knoll, stood as a bold architectural rebellion in a country that valued order, symmetry, and classical restraint. Almost immediately, critics and neighbors gave it a mocking nickname that would echo through history: Paulding's Folly. What they saw as excess and madness, time would ultimately recognize as genius. The owner, William Paulding Jr., former mayor of New York City, had commissioned Alexander Jackson Davis to design a rural retreat overlooking the Hudson River. What he received was unlike anything most Americans had ever seen. Instead of a balanced facade and classical columns, the house rose in an irregular composition of towers, gables, and pointed windows. It looked theatrical, romantic, and foreign, more like a European castle than an American home. In the early 19th century, American architectural taste was deeply conservative. Greek Revival dominated public and private buildings alike, symbolizing democracy, rationality, and civic virtue. Lyndhurst rejected all of that symbolism. Gothic Revival, with its medieval associations and emotional intensity, was viewed by many as irrational, impractical, and even un-American. To critics, Paulding had wasted money on a structure that defied common sense. The term folly carried weight. In architectural language, a folly was a decorative building with no practical purpose. An indulgence meant only to impress. Calling Lyndhurst a folly implied it was unserious, frivolous, and doomed to fail. Yet this accusation misunderstood the very philosophy behind the house. Davis was not building a joke or a vanity project. He was testing the limits of what American architecture could be. Ironically, the very features that drew ridicule were the ones that made Lyndhurst extraordinary. Its asymmetry, considered chaotic by critics, allowed the house to respond organically to the landscape. Its towers, mocked as impractical, provided dramatic viewpoints over the Hudson. Its varied windows, condemned as disorderly, framed carefully curated views of river, sky, and forest. Lyndhurst was not irrational. It was intentionally expressive. Paulding himself never fully escaped the criticism. Financial pressures eventually forced him to sell the property, reinforcing the idea that the house was a mistake. But architecture often needs time to be understood. What appeared excessive in 1838 began to look visionary by the mid-19th century, as Romantic design gained acceptance and the Gothic Revival movement spread. When later owners embraced and expanded the mansion rather than demolishing or correcting it, Lyndhurst's reputation began to shift. The house became evidence that early American architecture could break from classical imitation and develop its own imaginative voice. Paulding's Folly transformed from an insult into a historical footnote, a reminder that innovation is rarely celebrated at birth. Today the nickname feels almost ironic. Lyndhurst is now hailed as a masterpiece, studied by architects and preserved as a national treasure. The mansion that once shocked and offended has become one of the most beloved historic estates in the Hudson Valley. Its survival is proof that architectural courage often looks like folly until history catches up. What critics once laughed at, time ultimately crowned. Lyndhurst stands as a monument to the idea that daring design does not fail. It simply waits to be understood. Lyndhurst, as we see it today, is not the result of a single moment in time, but of a bold architectural evolution. While the original house was already controversial, its transformation into the grand Gothic landmark we recognize today came decades later, and remarkably, under the guidance of the same architect who first shocked America. The expansion of Lyndhurst did not dilute its identity, it magnified it. In the early 1860s, the estate was purchased by George Merritt, a successful New York merchant. Merritt admired the unusual character of the house rather than fearing it, and instead of replacing it with something more fashionable, he made a daring decision. He invited Alexander Jackson Davis back to expand his original creation. This was an extraordinary move. Few architects are given the opportunity to revisit and reinterpret their work after decades of changing tastes. Between 1864 and 1865, Davis undertook a massive enlargement of the mansion. The expansion more than doubled its size, transforming it from a curious Gothic villa into a commanding estate that dominated the Hudson River landscape. The additions were not subtle. New wings extended outward, roof lines became more complex, and ornamental detail intensified. The house no longer whispered Gothic romance. It declared it. The most iconic result of this expansion was the construction of the 4-story observation tower, now one of Lyndhurst's defining features. Rising above the treetops, the tower was both a symbolic and functional statement. Symbolically, it reinforced the mansion's resemblance to a medieval castle, complete with vertical dominance and a sense of watchful authority. Functionally, it offered sweeping views of the Hudson River, the Palisades, and on clear days, the distant outline of Manhattan. The tower transformed how the mansion interacted with its surroundings. Lyndhurst was no longer simply placed within the landscape, it commanded it. From the river below, the house now appeared larger, more dramatic, and unmistakably powerful. The expanded silhouette announced that this was not merely a residence, but a landmark meant to be seen, remembered, and discussed. Inside, the transformation was equally significant. New rooms allowed for grander entertaining, while circulation patterns became more theatrical. Staircases, corridors, and transitions between spaces were designed to build anticipation and reveal. Visitors were guided through a carefully choreographed experience that culminated in expansive rooms and breathtaking views. Architecture became performance. What makes this expansion remarkable is how seamlessly it integrated with the original structure. Rather than appearing as an afterthought, the new elements felt inevitable, as though the house had been waiting to grow. Davis understood his own architectural language deeply enough to extend it without contradiction. The Gothic vocabulary remained consistent, unified, and expressive. The expansion also shifted Lyndhurst's social role. No longer a controversial retreat, it became a prestigious estate suitable for high society, political figures, and influential guests. The house now communicated wealth, taste, and cultural confidence. Gothic Revival, once mocked, had arrived. Lyndhurst's transformation into a castle-like estate marked a turning point in American architectural history. It demonstrated that romantic architecture could be monumental without losing intimacy, dramatic without becoming absurd. The mansion had evolved, but its spirit remained unchanged, bold, imaginative, and defiant. Today, the towers still rise above the Hudson, casting long shadows across the lawns below. They stand as reminders that Lyndhurst was never content to remain small or safe. It grew, it dared, and in doing so, it became immortal. When Jay Gould purchased Lyndhurst in 1880, the mansion entered its most powerful and controversial chapter. Gould was not merely wealthy. He was one of the most feared and influential figures of the Gilded Age. A railroad tycoon, financier, and master strategist, Gould reshaped American industry from behind the scenes. When he made Lyndhurst his home, the estate became a quiet stage for decisions that echoed across the nation. Unlike earlier owners, Gould did not seek to reinvent the mansion architecturally. Instead, he recognized that Lyndhurst already projected exactly what he needed: authority, permanence, and mystery. He shortened its name to Lyndhurst, a subtle but deliberate act that refined the estate's identity and aligned it with European aristocratic tradition. The house became an extension of Gould himself, formidable, misunderstood, and impossible to ignore. Gould's public reputation was deeply polarizing. To admirers, he was a brilliant businessman who mastered the chaos of 19th-century capitalism. To critics, he was a ruthless manipulator, responsible for market crashes, monopolies, and financial ruin. Newspapers painted him as a villain, yet Gould himself was intensely private. Lyndhurst offered the perfect refuge, removed from Manhattan yet close enough to remain connected to power. Within these walls, Gould conducted business quietly. While the grand room suggested leisure and luxury, Lyndhurst functioned as a strategic retreat where alliances were considered, decisions weighed, and fortunes protected. The mansion's secluded setting and complex layout reinforced its role as a place of control rather than spectacle. This was not a show house. It was a stronghold. Gould's influence extended beyond railroads. He was deeply invested in telegraphs, finance, and infrastructure, shaping the systems that connected America. During his ownership, Lyndhurst became linked to the broader story of industrial expansion, a physical symbol of the wealth generated by America's rapid transformation. The Gothic architecture, once romantic and controversial, now took on a darker edge, mirroring the ruthless efficiency of the age. Despite his fearsome reputation, Gould was a devoted family man. Lyndhurst was where his children grew up, away from the relentless scrutiny of the city. The mansion's grounds offered space, privacy, and stability in an era of constant upheaval. For Gould, Lyndhurst was not merely a display of success, it was a sanctuary. When Jay Gould died in 1892, his fortune was among the largest in the world, yet his legacy remained complicated. Lyndhurst, however, endured. It absorbed his story without being consumed by it. The mansion did not become a monument to a single man, but a witness to an era defined by ambition, excess, and transformation. Under Gould's ownership, Lyndhurst reached the height of its social and economic significance. It stood at the intersection of architecture and power, beauty and controversy. The Gothic towers that once shocked critics now framed one of the most influential lives of the Gilded Age. Lyndhurst did not change Jay Gould, but Jay Gould forever changed Lyndhurst's place in American history. One of Lyndhurst Mansion's greatest distinctions is not what was built, but what was never erased. While countless Gilded Age estates were stripped, remodeled, or modernized beyond recognition, Lyndhurst remains astonishingly intact. Walking through its interiors today is not a recreation of the past. It is a direct encounter with it. Few American mansions preserve their original atmosphere with such authenticity. From the moment one enters, Lyndhurst's interiors reveal a deliberate commitment to craftsmanship over fashion. The rooms are rich but restrained, layered with meaning rather than excess. Carved woodwork, original fireplaces, period wallpapers, and custom furnishings form a cohesive aesthetic rooted in Gothic Revival principles. Every detail contributes to the emotional experience of the space. Many furnishings were designed specifically for Lyndhurst, some by Alexander Jackson Davis himself. Rather than importing generic luxury pieces, the interiors were conceived as extensions of the architecture. Chairs echo the pointed arches of windows. Tables mirror the weight and solidity of the structure. This integration creates an immersive environment where nothing feels out of place, a rarity even among historic homes. The stained glass windows are among the most striking features. Filtering light into colored patterns, they soften the mansion's dramatic architecture while reinforcing its medieval inspiration. These windows were not purely decorative. They shaped mood and atmosphere, casting shifting shadows that changed throughout the day. Light at Lyndhurst was a design tool, carefully controlled and choreographed. Fireplaces serve as visual anchors in many rooms, each uniquely designed. Beyond their practical function, they acted as symbols of warmth, stability, and status. Mantels are richly carved, often incorporating Gothic motifs such as tracery and foliage. In winter months, these hearths would have defined the rhythm of daily life, drawing family and guests into intimate conversation. What truly sets Lyndhurst apart is the absence of heavy modernization. While basic utilities were discreetly added over time, the mansion avoided the sweeping renovations that altered so many historic estates in the 20th century. As a result, visitors encounter original floor plans, authentic finishes, and rooms that still communicate their original purpose without explanation. Equally revealing are the transitions between spaces. Public rooms flow into one another with grandeur, while private areas feel contained and introspective. This contrast reflects 19th century social structure, where hospitality and privacy were carefully separated. The architecture enforces etiquette, guiding movement and behavior without words. Even where patterns tell a story, slightly polished stair rails, softened flooring near fireplaces, and subtle aging in materials speak to generations of use. These traces of human presence add emotional depth, transforming the mansion from a static monument into a lived-in world. Lyndhurst's interiors survive not because they were forgotten, but because they were respected. Each generation of caretakers recognized their value and resisted the urge to impose contemporary taste. The result is a mansion that feels honest, not curated, not staged, but preserved. To walk through Lyndhurst is to step into an uninterrupted narrative. The rooms do not explain themselves. They simply exist, unchanged, waiting for the visitor to listen. Lyndhurst Mansion was never meant to stand alone. From its earliest conception, it was designed as a dialogue between architecture and landscape, a conversation where nature was not background, but an equal partner. Perched high above the Hudson River, the mansion's setting is as intentional and expressive as its Gothic towers, transforming the estate into a living work of art. Alexander Jackson Davis believed that a building's surroundings should shape its identity. At Lyndhurst, this philosophy reached its full expression. The mansion was carefully positioned to command sweeping river views, while remaining partially hidden from approach. This balance between revelation and concealment created anticipation. Visitors did not see the house all at once. Instead, it unfolded gradually, framed by trees, hills, and winding paths. The Hudson River itself functioned as a dynamic visual element. Its surface reflected light into the mansion's windows, constantly changing the mood of interior spaces. Morning mist, afternoon glare, and twilight shadows all became part of the architectural experience. Lyndhurst was not static. It evolved with weather, season, and time of day. Windows were placed with extraordinary care. Rather than repeating patterns for symmetry, openings were positioned to capture specific scenes. A bend in the river, a distant cliff, a canopy of trees. Each window acted as a living painting, its subject never the same twice. This approach transformed everyday activities into moments of contemplation, linking domestic life to the natural world. The mansion's elevation above the river amplified its Gothic presence. From below, Lyndhurst appears almost suspended, its towers rising from the landscape like watchful sentinels. From above, the river becomes a vast, moving canvas. This vertical relationship reinforced the romantic ideals of Gothic Revival: height, drama, and emotional intensity. Equally important is how the landscape softened the architecture. While the mansion's stonework and sharp angles could feel imposing, rolling lawns and naturalistic plantings balanced that severity. This contrast prevented Lyndhurst from becoming fortress-like. Instead, it remained inviting, mysterious rather than hostile. The setting also shaped social experience. Guests arriving by carriage would pass through carefully designed routes that concealed and then revealed the mansion at precisely chosen moments. This controlled approach heightened drama and reinforced the estate's sense of arrival. Architecture did not begin at the door. It began at the edge of the property. Seasonal change further deepened Lyndhurst's identity. Autumn transformed the estate into a tapestry of color, echoing the Gothic emphasis on texture and contrast. Winter stripped the landscape bare, sharpening the mansion's silhouette against the sky. Spring and summer softened it again, weaving architecture and nature into a single composition. Today, the Hudson River setting remains one of Lyndhurst's greatest assets. Despite modern development along the river, the estate retains its sense of isolation and grandeur. The view is still the same one that inspired Davis and captivated 19th-century visitors. Lyndhurst is not simply a mansion overlooking the Hudson, it is a monument shaped by it. Stone and river, tower and sky, history and nature remain locked in a partnership that defines the estate's enduring power. Hidden behind Lyndhurst's romantic Gothic facade lies a story of technological ambition and architectural innovation. The estate's conservatory was not merely a decorative indulgence. It was a forward-looking experiment that placed Lyndhurst at the cutting edge of 19th-century design. In an era when glass and iron were reshaping architecture, Lyndhurst quietly embraced the future. The original conservatory, constructed during Jay Gould's ownership, was intended to house exotic plants and create a controlled environment that blurred the boundary between indoors and outdoors. Conservatories were symbols of wealth and sophistication, allowing owners to cultivate rare species year-round. But at Lyndhurst, this structure would evolve into something far more significant. After an early conservatory was destroyed by fire, Gould commissioned a replacement that reflected the latest advances in engineering. The new structure used iron framing and expansive glass panels, making it one of the earliest large-scale examples of its kind in the United States. This approach anticipated architectural techniques that would later dominate train stations, exhibition halls, and skyscrapers. Unlike the heavy stone of the main house, the conservatory was light, transparent, and airy. Sunlight flooded the interior, creating an atmosphere radically different from the mansion's shadowed Gothic rooms. The contrast was intentional. Where the house evoked medieval romance, the conservatory celebrated modernity and progress. Together, they embodied the dual identity of the Gilded Age, nostalgia for the past paired with faith in technology. Structurally, the conservatory was revolutionary. Iron allowed for slender supports and wide spans, minimizing visual obstruction and maximizing light. Glass panels formed walls and ceilings, dissolving the barrier between architecture and nature. This design required precision engineering, reflecting a growing confidence in industrial materials and methods. The conservatory also served a social function. It was a place for leisure, reflection, and display. Guests could stroll among lush greenery even in winter, experiencing a curated version of nature shaped by science. In this space, plants became luxury objects, and climate control became a symbol of mastery over the environment. From an architectural perspective, the conservatory represented a turning point. It demonstrated that historic estates could incorporate cutting-edge technology without sacrificing aesthetic integrity. Lyndhurst did not abandon its Gothic identity. It expanded it. The conservatory added a new chapter, showing that innovation and tradition could coexist. Although the conservatory stands somewhat apart from the main house, it remains deeply connected to Lyndhurst's story. It reflects the mindset of its most powerful owner, Jay Gould, whose investments in railroads and telegraphs transformed America. The structure's iron skeleton mirrored the infrastructure reshaping the nation. Today, the conservatory stands as a reminder that Lyndhurst was not frozen in time during the 19th century. It was actively engaging with the future. Amid stone towers and stained glass, this luminous structure whispered of what architecture was becoming. In glass and iron, Lyndhurst revealed a different kind of power. Not medieval or romantic, but industrial and modern. Tucked discreetly within the grounds of Lyndhurst is one of the estate's most unexpected features. A regulation-sized bowling pavilion built in 1894. At first glance, it may seem like a charming curiosity, but in reality, this structure reveals a great deal about leisure, class, and social life during the Gilded Age. Bowling at Lyndhurst was not casual recreation, it was a statement. The pavilion was commissioned by Helen Gould, Jay Gould's daughter, and its construction reflected both wealth and modernity. At a time when bowling was still evolving from a rough tavern pastime into a refined sport, installing a private bowling alley on a country estate placed Lyndhurst firmly at the forefront of elite leisure culture. Very few private homes in America could boast such a facility. Unlike public bowling alleys, which were often noisy and informal, Lyndhurst's pavilion was elegant and controlled. The structure was purpose-built, with carefully proportioned lanes, polished wood surfaces, and ample space for spectators. Bowling here was social theater, an opportunity for guests to gather, compete politely, and display refinement through recreation. The pavilion also speaks to the changing role of women in elite society. Helen Gould was known for her independence, philanthropy, and progressive outlook. By commissioning the bowling pavilion, she asserted leisure as something active rather than passive, an experience that encouraged participation rather than observation. Bowling was physical, competitive, and modern, aligning with a new vision of social engagement. Architecturally, the pavilion was designed to blend harmoniously with the estate while remaining clearly secondary to the mansion. It did not compete with Lyndhurst's Gothic drama. Instead, it complemented it. The building's scale and placement emphasized that leisure was an extension of estate life, not its centerpiece. The bowling pavilion also functioned as a social equalizer within elite circles. While Lyndhurst's formal rooms enforced strict etiquette, the bowling alley allowed for relaxed interaction. Titles mattered less on the lanes. Skill, humor, and camaraderie took precedence. In this space, the rigid hierarchy of the Gilded Age softened, if only briefly. Over time, as bowling became widely accessible and private alleys fell out of fashion, the pavilion slipped into quiet obscurity. Yet unlike many estate amenities that were demolished or repurposed, Lyndhurst's bowling pavilion survived. Its preservation offers rare insight into how America's wealthiest families entertain themselves beyond ballrooms and dining rooms. Today, the restored pavilion stands as one of the oldest surviving bowling alleys in the United States. It captures a moment when leisure was becoming structured, modern, and symbolic of social identity. Visitors encountering it are often surprised, not just by its existence, but by what it reveals about life at Lyndhurst. The bowling pavilion reminds us that Lyndhurst was not only a place of power and architecture, but of human experience, laughter, competition, and carefully curated pleasure. Even amid Gothic towers and historic grandeur, the sound of rolling balls once echoed across the estate. While Lyndhurst's towers, salons, and sweeping views were designed to impress, another world existed just out of sight, a complex network of servant spaces, backstairs, and service corridors that kept the estate functioning flawlessly. This hidden infrastructure reveals the reality behind 19th century luxury and offers one of the most honest windows into daily life at Lyndhurst. The mansion was designed with a strict separation between public and private realms. Guests experienced elegance and ease, never seeing the labor that sustained it. Servants, meanwhile, moved through discreet routes, staircases tucked into corners, corridors concealed behind walls, and rooms positioned away from formal spaces. This invisible choreography ensured that service was efficient and unobtrusive. Lyndhurst employed a sizable domestic staff, including cooks, maids, butlers, gardeners, and maintenance workers. Each role was clearly defined, and the architecture reinforced hierarchy. Narrow stairs contrasted sharply with grand staircases. Low-ceilinged workrooms stood in opposition to lofty reception rooms. These physical differences mirrored social divisions that structured 19th century life. The backstairs were especially critical. They allowed servants to move quickly between floors without crossing paths with guests. Meals could appear seamlessly, rooms refreshed silently, and fires tended without disruption. The mansion's smooth operation depended on these unseen pathways, making them just as essential as its most ornate spaces. Basement areas housed kitchens, pantries, storage rooms, and workspaces that were functional rather than decorative. These rooms were built for durability and efficiency, with thick walls, large hearths, and practical layouts. Here, the pace of life was relentless, shaped by schedules and expectations rather than leisure. Despite their invisibility, servants were deeply embedded in the estate's rhythm. Their workdays began before dawn and ended long after guests retired. The architecture ensured that comfort flowed upward, warmth, light, and service, while labor remained below. Lyndhurst, like all great estates, was powered by this imbalance. What makes Lyndhurst exceptional is that these spaces have survived largely intact. Today, visitors can explore areas once hidden, gaining insight into the human systems that supported grandeur. Seeing the contrast firsthand deepens understanding of the mansion as a working environment rather than a static monument. These service areas also humanize Lyndhurst. They remind us that behind every polished surface were hands that cleaned, cooked, repaired, and maintained. The mansion's beauty was not effortless. It was produced daily through discipline and coordination. In revealing its hidden world, Lyndhurst tells a fuller story. It becomes not just a symbol of wealth, but a reflection of the social structures that defined an era. The backstairs may have been concealed, but their legacy remains visible in the very fabric of the house. While Jay Gould's name dominates headlines of the Gilded Age, it was his daughter Helen Gould who reshaped Lyndhurst's moral and cultural identity. Intelligent, independent, and deeply philanthropic, Helen transformed the estate from a symbol of industrial power into a place associated with generosity, reform, and social responsibility. Her influence marked a profound shift in Lyndhurst's story. Born into immense wealth, Helen Gould could have lived a life of quiet privilege. Instead, she chose visibility and action. Unlike many women of her class, she involved herself directly in charitable causes, education initiatives, and social reform. Lyndhurst became both her refuge and her operational base, a place where power was redirected toward public good. Under Helen's stewardship, the mansion opened itself to broader purposes. She welcomed educators, reformers, religious leaders, and community figures onto the estate. Lyndhurst was no longer just a private retreat for elites. It became a hub for discussion, planning, and humanitarian work. This transformation subtly altered how the mansion functioned and how it was perceived. Helen's philanthropy extended nationally. She supported schools, churches, libraries, disaster relief efforts, and social programs aimed at improving living conditions for working-class Americans. During times of crisis, she mobilized resources quickly, using her wealth strategically rather than ceremonially. Lyndhurst, with its space and infrastructure, often played a logistical role in these efforts. Her values were reflected in how the estate was used. Unlike the lavish entertainments common among Gilded Age families, gatherings at Lyndhurst under Helen's leadership emphasized purpose over spectacle. Leisure still existed, as seen in the bowling pavilion, but it was balanced by a sense of responsibility. Wealth, in her view, carried obligation. Helen Gould also challenged expectations of women in her era. She managed assets, made independent decisions, and remained unmarried, devoting her life to public service rather than social convention. Lyndhurst became a symbol of that autonomy, a place governed not by patriarchal legacy, but by individual conviction. Perhaps most importantly, Helen understood the value of preservation. She recognized Lyndhurst as more than a family home. It was a cultural artifact. Her respect for the estate's history ensured its survival with integrity, setting the stage for its eventual transition into public stewardship. When Helen Gould died in 1938, her legacy extended far beyond Lyndhurst. Yet the mansion bears her imprint in quieter ways, through continuity, care, and purpose. She softened the shadows cast by her father's reputation and infused the estate with a sense of conscience. Lyndhurst under Helen Gould became proof that power could evolve, that an estate born of ambition could mature into a place of meaning. Her chapter in its history reminds us that legacy is not only inherited, but chosen. By the mid-20th century, America's great estates were disappearing at an alarming rate. Economic pressure, changing lifestyles, and rising maintenance costs led to the demolition or drastic alteration of countless historic mansions. Lyndhurst stood at a crossroads, either to be lost like so many others, or preserved as a rare survivor. Its survival was not accidental. It was the result of deliberate action and foresight. After the Gould family era ended, Lyndhurst faced an uncertain future. Large estates were increasingly seen as impractical relics of another age. Many were sold off, subdivided, or stripped of their architectural character. That Lyndhurst avoided this fate speaks to the values of those who understood its importance beyond private ownership. In 1961, a pivotal decision was made. Lyndhurst was donated to the National Trust for Historic Preservation, marking a decisive shift from private residence to public heritage site. This act ensured that the mansion would not be altered to suit modern fashion or commercial interests. Instead, it would be preserved as an authentic record of 19th century architecture and life. The transition to public stewardship was not simple. Preservation required extensive research, maintenance, and careful decision-making. Every repair had to respect original materials and methods. Rather than updating spaces, conservators focused on stabilization and authenticity. This approach preserved not just the appearance of Lyndhurst, but its spirit. Opening the mansion to the public transformed its role. Visitors could now experience rooms once reserved for the elite, gaining insight into architecture, social structure, and daily life. Lyndhurst became educational rather than exclusive, shifting its significance from private power to shared cultural memory. Preservation also extended beyond the house itself. The estate's landscape, outbuildings, conservatory, and service areas were recognized as integral components of the whole. Protecting Lyndhurst meant preserving an ecosystem of architecture, environment, and history, not just a single building. The fight to save Lyndhurst reflects a broader movement in American preservation history. Its success demonstrated that large estates could be sustained as public institutions without sacrificing authenticity. Lyndhurst became a model for responsible conservation, influencing how other historic properties were approached. Today, its continued existence feels almost miraculous. Where many estates exist only in photographs, Lyndhurst remains tangible, walkable, breathable, real. Preservation turned what could have been a lost monument into a living classroom. Lyndhurst survives because people chose memory over convenience, integrity over profit. Its preservation is not just about saving stone and wood, but about honoring the stories embedded within them. Long after its days as a private estate, Lyndhurst found a new role, not as a home of tycoons but as a cinematic icon. With its Gothic towers, sweeping lawns, and atmospheric interiors, the mansion became a natural setting for film and television. On screen, Lyndhurst's architecture speaks instantly, conveying mystery, wealth, elegance, and power without a single line of dialogue. Directors and production designers are drawn to Lyndhurst because it feels authentic. Unlike sets built to suggest grandeur, Lyndhurst embodies it. The irregular silhouette, pointed arches, and dramatic tower give the mansion a timeless quality, allowing it to stand in for multiple eras and locations. It can be aristocratic Europe, Gilded Age America, or a fictional world of intrigue. Over the decades, Lyndhurst has appeared in numerous films, television series, documentaries, and commercials. Its versatility allows it to portray both opulence and foreboding. Sunlit exteriors suggest romantic elegance, while shadowed interiors hint at secrets and tension. Few locations offer such emotional range without alteration. Filmmakers particularly value the estate's preserved interiors. Original woodwork, fireplaces, staircases, and period details eliminate the need for heavy set dressing. Cameras can move through spaces that already carry narrative weight. The mansion does not simply host stories. It contributes to them. The grounds are equally cinematic. Long approaches, rolling lawns, river views, and wooded paths provide dynamic exterior shots that feel expansive and controlled at once. These landscapes allow for sweeping establishing scenes as well as intimate moments of character development. Lyndhurst's presence on screen has also reshaped public perception. For many viewers, their first encounter with the mansion is through film or television rather than history books. This exposure has transformed Lyndhurst into a visual shorthand for elegance and intrigue, embedding it in popular culture. Importantly, filming at Lyndhurst is carefully managed to protect the estate. Preservation and production must coexist. Crews operate under strict guidelines, ensuring that the mansion's fabric remains intact. This balance allows Lyndhurst to remain active and relevant without compromising its integrity. Through cinema, Lyndhurst continues to evolve. It becomes not just a relic of the past, but a living character in contemporary storytelling. Each appearance adds another layer to its identity, reinforcing its place in the cultural imagination. In this way, Lyndhurst proves that historic architecture does not belong solely to history. On screen, it lives again, dramatic, expressive, and endlessly compelling. There are places where history lingers quietly, and then there are places where it feels almost alive. Lyndhurst belongs to the latter. Beyond its documented past, the mansion has long been surrounded by myths, legends, and an unmistakable atmosphere that has fueled speculation for generations. Whether one believes in the supernatural or not, few visitors leave Lyndhurst without sensing its unusual presence. Part of this aura comes from architecture itself. Gothic Revival buildings are designed to evoke emotion, and Lyndhurst excels at it. Long corridors, shadowed corners, towering ceilings, and filtered light create an environment where imagination easily takes hold. The mansion does not reveal everything at once. It withholds, invites, and unsettles, the perfect conditions for legend. Over the years, visitors and staff have reported unexplained sounds, shifting shadows, and the sensation of being watched in certain rooms. These accounts are often associated with the mansion's upper floors, tower, and servant corridors, areas rich in history and relatively unchanged. While no single story can be verified, their persistence adds to Lyndhurst's mystique. The Gould family's complicated legacy contributes another layer. Jay Gould's reputation as a ruthless industrialist has colored perceptions of the mansion. To some, Lyndhurst feels like a place that absorbed ambition, conflict, and secrecy. The contrast between wealth and controversy creates fertile ground for ghost stories, whether literal or symbolic. Even skeptics acknowledge the mansion's emotional weight. Standing alone in a quiet room surrounded by original furnishings and filtered light, one becomes acutely aware of time. The sense that lives unfolded here, ambitions pursued, decisions made, fortunes shaped, can feel overwhelming. Lyndhurst invites reflection, and reflection can easily feel like presence. Seasonal events and twilight visits amplify this effect. As daylight fades and shadows stretch across the estate, Lyndhurst seems to transform. The mansion's silhouette sharpens, its towers loom larger, and the Hudson below darkens. In these moments, history feels close enough to touch. Importantly, these myths are not exploited for spectacle. Lyndhurst does not market itself as a haunted house. Its power lies in subtlety. The stories circulate quietly, passed from guide to visitor, from visitor to imagination. This restraint preserves the mansion's dignity while allowing mystery to thrive. Whether one interprets Lyndhurst's atmosphere as supernatural, psychological, or architectural, its impact is undeniable. The mansion does not simply exist, it acts upon those who enter it. It slows time, heightens awareness, and blurs the line between past and present. Lyndhurst's legends remind us that history is not just recorded, it is felt. And in this mansion above the Hudson, the feeling never entirely fades. Today, Lyndhurst stands not as a relic frozen behind glass, but as a living monument, one that continues to evolve while remaining faithful to its past. More than a historic house museum, Lyndhurst is an immersive experience where architecture, landscape, and history still interact exactly as they were intended to. As a public site, Lyndhurst invites visitors to move beyond observation and into engagement. Walking its halls is not a guided fantasy or staged reenactment. It is a direct encounter with authenticity. Original rooms remain intact, furnishings are genuine, and the mansion's layout still shapes how people move, pause, and reflect. Few historic estates in America offer this level of continuity. The estate functions as an educational resource, offering tours that explore architecture, social history, preservation, and daily life across generations. From grand public rooms to hidden service corridors, Lyndhurst presents a complete picture of 19th century estate life. Not just its elegance, but its complexity. Beyond tours, Lyndhurst remains active through cultural programming, exhibitions, seasonal events, and community engagement. These activities ensure the estate remains relevant rather than static. History here is not something to be remembered once. It is revisited, reconsidered, and reinterpreted continually. The grounds play an equally important role today. Visitors walk the same paths once traveled by carriage, stand at overlooks that framed conversations more than a century ago, and experience the Hudson River view that shaped the mansion's identity. In an age of rapid development, this preserved landscape offers rare continuity. Lyndhurst also serves as a reminder of preservation's power. Its survival demonstrates that historic estates can adapt without sacrificing integrity. Careful stewardship ensures that maintenance supports authenticity rather than novelty. Each restoration decision respects the original vision rather than rewriting it. Perhaps most importantly, Lyndhurst continues to inspire. Architects study it. Filmmakers use it. Visitors feel it. The mansion's Gothic silhouette still commands attention, not because it demands admiration, but because it earns it through endurance and meaning. Lyndhurst's story did not end with its last private owner. It continues every time someone walks through its doors, looks out over the Hudson, or senses the quiet weight of history within its walls. Above the river, framed by sky and stone, Lyndhurst remains what it has always been: bold, mysterious, and unforgettable. As the sun lowers over the Hudson and shadows stretch across the stone walls, Lyndhurst stands exactly as it has for generations: silent, watchful, and unbroken. Empires rose and fell beyond its gates. Fortunes were made, challenged, and redefined within its walls. Yet the mansion remains, holding every chapter without judgment. Lyndhurst is more than architecture. It is ambition carved in stone, imagination given form, and history preserved not as memory, but as presence. Every tower, every corridor, every window overlooking the river reminds us that the past is never truly gone. It waits to be rediscovered. As you leave this place, you don't simply walk away from a mansion. You carry its atmosphere with you, the weight of its stories, the echo of its footsteps, and the quiet power of endurance. If Lyndhurst captivated you, Let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and tell us which historic mansion you'd like to explore next. Because behind every great house, there's a story still waiting to be told.